So I've been away with family several of the last few Sundays. I've got some things I wanted to catch up on. First of all, back on July 7, Kathy and I went to the Chautauqua institution that she mentioned. The guest lecturer that morning was longtime media personality Chuck Todd, who you may know hosted Meet the Press. He now has a podcast and a newsletter. And he spoke for quite a while about the intersection of politics and media. And I thought he said a lot of interesting things. So I want to share with you some of the things that he said. He talked about political media as exploring the best in human values, which I immediately, of course, thought, well, that's kind of what we try to do here each week. He said one of these two parties is the Whigs. You may recall the Whigs were a party that was prominent, and it was the Dems and the Whigs for many decades of the 19th century, and then the Whigs disappeared when the Republicans came along. So he said, one of these two parties, the way we are going is not sustainable. One of these two parties is the Whigs. We just don't know which one yet. He said, each party is acting rationally in pursuit of their value-driven goals. If you look at the values that drive those parties, the parties themselves are, whether you disagree or agree with those values, the parties are pursuing those values. He said, the media is like a mirror. And we don't like what we see when we see in the mirror, and that's part of the reason we don't like the media, because it holds a mirror up to us, and we don't like seeing some of our flaws. He said all politics has become national. And of course he said that Tip O'Neill would roll over in his grave because Tip had said that all politics is local. He said the most consequential presidential assassination was of Garfield. He said Garfield's assassination potentially held back the Civil Rights Acts of 1965 past 90 years later, and he thought that Garfield could have done something like that at that time in Reconstruction. He said that we need to have a more local focus, more focus on local media, which of course is dying, more focus on local politics, because local politicians become national politicians. He said we should demand more choice. He said there's two parties. It's like going into a shirt store where they sell extra small and extra large. He talked about a spiral of extremism because we say, well, what about them? He said it's easy to see this if you break out of your algorithm bubble. He talked about media blame and asked what event broke us. And he said from his perspective, the event that broke us was OJ. Starting with that chase in June of 1994, this is before the iPhone. This is the advent of the internet. He said this is the beginning of having 500 channels. He said the managing editors for the media used to say, our mission is to give the public what it wants, not what it needs. It turned news into episodic, serialized news coverage. Fox started in 1996, said we're going to pay a price for this at some point. Executives realized they could make money on the news, which they hadn't really done before. News was looked at as sort of, that this is a public obligation for channels. So, but they realized they could start making money on the news, so they told editors and journalists, go figure it out. Go figure out how you can monetize this. So the easiest way to make money now is to take a side, to get somebody angry about something. None of this probably is shocking, but it was interesting to hear a national figure put it in these perspectives. So there's not one big solution, but we need leaders who understand the story of America. We need boring reforms. We need local news to build trusting audiences. We need to rebuild broken communities, not just rely on MAGA or Democratic Socialists of America. He said a big thing is fixing Congress, because the problems of the executive and the judiciary branches are largely because of failures of Congress to do their job. Said we need better stewardship of our federal government. The biggest laugh line he got was when he said that Congress should be like jury duty. If we picked 435 random people out of the phone book, could they do any worse? And everybody laughed, but I also thought, well, I think that would be worse. but how much better? He talked about making civics a requirement for a high school diploma. He said, lean in and teach it. Now this, of course, as many of these other things did, made me think about Justice Southbury, made me think about Professor David Bass, who speaks here every year. The importance of having someone like that. If we had a Professor David Bass in every courtroom in America, in every classroom, in America, would that not make our civics engagement and understanding much deeper? I thought about Professor Lindsay Cormack, who did a Zoom with us last year, talking about how to raise better citizens, and saying that in most places in America, the civics professor in high schools has the same name, Coach. So he was talking about that kind of thing, and he said, embrace the questions and challenges. Don't be afraid of the civics issues. Lean into them. He said, what we choose to teach and not teach determines what we learn. He said, people don't realize the Middle East wasn't created in 1948. That's not when it all started. He said there's a lack of education about the fall of the Ottoman Empire and everything that happened before that. He talked about tone being important and criticized himself for being snarky. You may recall the weekend after President Trump was inaugurated in 2017, and he had Kellyanne Conway on, and Chuck Todd was trying to say, well, can you at least admit that this wasn't the biggest presidential audience for an inauguration ever? And she said, well, Chuck, and she said, wouldn't admit it. And he said, but we have the facts. She said, you have your facts, but we have alternative facts. And he criticized himself for laughing and sort of giggling at that and making fun about it and snickering at it. And he wasn't happy that he didn't immediately explore that as opposed to simply laughing it off. He told his staff on election night 2016, just remember, half of the country is ecstatic right now. He said media is now like drinking water from a sewer pipe. We can do it, but you need to filter out the He said he wasn't sure that Clinton or Bill Clinton or Barack Obama could win this next election. He said the Dems have developed a liking for the most electable candidate on the left wing. Not necessarily the most left-wing candidate, but the one who's the most electable in that left wing. He said, let's see what happens in Michigan. If the Democrats lose Michigan and Maine, the left will be blamed. His concern about the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, is that the second Trump election would radicalize the left and not the right. He said, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing until one party figures out what we want. The system is designed to compromise, and someone needs to figure out how to do that. We need to explain how that works. He said that the media really needs to cover politics as it is, not as we wish it was. And all of this made me, that's the end of what I want to tell you about what Chuck Todd said, but all of it made me think of a conversation I had with my old college buddy, my fellow DJ in college, who became Chuck Todd's producer for many years. And I've told this here before, but it's worth repeating. He was the executive producer of NBC Nightly News and Meet the Press for many years before retiring in around 2019. And he said he left media because he and so many others, after Trump was elected, felt like we have been telling America what is going on. We've been shining a light on everything for his whole 30-year professional career. And this is what happens? And there was a lot of what Chuck Todd said that made me think of that. But Chuck was saying, my friend was saying, and so I quit. I couldn't take that anymore. I couldn't take that disappointment. Chuck is kind of saying we need to find a way through this. We need to find a way out of this, which has been obviously one of the themes we've had here for a long time, is what comes next. We'll be talking about that a lot over the next couple of years.